The stagecoach creaked to a halt at the edge of Calico Ridge, wheels sinking into the half-thawed ruts of early spring. Clara Emmett stepped down with a sleeping boy cradled to her chest, his cheek nestled against her collarbone, one small hand clutching the corner of her shawl. The wind carried the sharp bite of snow melt and pine, the scent of earth waking from frost. Her boots struck the ground with hesitant weight, and the townsfolk gathered at the post office paused their conversation, heads tilting just enough to stare without apology. She straightened her back. Beneath the shawl, her dress was clean but worn at the seams, threadbare, where the cuffs kissed her wrist. A faded ribbon held her hair back, frayed at the end. She looked like a woman trying not to look broken. The boy stirred. She kissed the top of his head and turned toward the saloon, where she'd heard her late sister's husband Caleb Torrance tended bar. Family by law at least. Inside, smoke clung to the rafters, boots scraped against floorboards. A piano sat quiet in the corner, keys chipped. She found him near the counter, wiping down glasses with a rag. When he turned and saw her, his expression froze. "Clara," he said, voice flat. "I thought you'd gone back east." "I brought Eli," she said, shifting the child slightly. "Your nephew." He didn't look at the boy. "Ain't my blood." Her lips parted, but no words came. She'd rehearsed the journey in her mind for weeks, held the hope close that at least he'd take the boy in, that someone would. Caleb turned his back to her. "Ain't no room here," the boy whimpered, sensing the change. She left without another word, past the church, past the bakery where two women narrowed their eyes at her, whispering behind gloved hands, past the blacksmith who didn't even glance her way. By dusk, she sat on the steps of the abandoned mill at the edge of town, clutching Eli to her chest, rocking him gently. A cold wind moved through the brittle trees, making them creak like tired bones. Her fingers were numb. Her pride. She did not cry. She was too used to being unwanted. But as she looked out over the snowy hills, something inside her stiffened, not with rage, but resolve. She wasn't leaving. Morning came pale and brittle, sunlight cutting sharp angles across the frost-laced porch of the mill. Clara's shawl was damp from dew, her back sore from a night spent upright with Eli pressed close to stay warm. He hadn't stirred much, worn out from the days of travel and the heavy silence that followed rejection. She rose stiffly, adjusting his weight, and stepped into the hollowed-out millal, broken beams and dust-sweet air. The roof leaked in places, but it stood. That was enough. A roof was a kind of grace, however cracked. She laid Eli down atop an old flour sack, and tucked the shawl beneath his cheek. Then she crouched by the rusted stove in the corner and pressed a hand to her belly. Hunger coiled in her like a quiet fire. She hadn't eaten since the day before. Calico Ridge stirred slowly. Smoke drifted from chimneys. Hooves clattered down the main road. She stood in the doorway and watched, unnoticed. A girl in town, no, a woman. She reminded herself, without family, without a man's name to shield her, without welcome. Still, she walked. She made her way to the bakery. The smell of cinnamon and yeast beckoned like memory. The woman behind the counter, gray hair twisted into a tight bun, apron crisp, looked her up and down. "You selling something?" Clara shook her head. "No, ma'am." "Then be quick." Clara nodded, eyes lowering. "Just looking for work. Cleaning, mending, anything you need." The woman scoffed softly. "We don't take in strangers." It was much the same at the laundry, the seamstress shop, the stables. Her accent Eastern, her eyes too tired, her hands too soft for trust. By noon, the only kindness she'd received was from the town dog, who sniffed her skirts and licked Eli's fingers. By nightfall, she returned to the mill empty-handed but more resolved. She boiled creek water over a meager fire made from scavenged wood, tore off a corner of stale bread from her travel pack, and split it between them. Eli chewed quietly, his eyes never questioned. When he fell asleep again, she sat cross-legged beside him and pulled a needle and thread from the satchel beneath her skirt. Her fingers moved carefully, stitching a tear in his blanket. It wasn't much, but it was something, a way forward. The wind outside howled soft and low, like it, too, was looking for a place to belong. So was she. Clara began each day. Before the frost lifted from the grass, she'd leave Eli bundled in the patchwork quilt she'd salvaged from an old trunk in the mill's back room, a fire burning low beside him, and step into town with her sewing kit clutched like a lifeline. Her boots were scuffed, toes damp from the morning thaw, and her fingers chapped raw by thread and wind. She moved quietly, never begging, only asking once. At first they ignored her, looked past her like she wasn't there. Some muttered ruined, under breath. Some simply stared with narrowed eyes, suspicious of what they didn't understand. A woman without a husband, carrying a child not her own, asking for work. It didn't sit right with Calico Ridge. But Clara didn't flinch, didn't answer back. She stitched a torn hem for the preacher's wife, mended a child's apron for a mother too weary to do it herself, replaced a row of buttons for the schoolmistress who never quite met her gaze. She never asked for payment up front, only if they were satisfied. Some paid her in coins, some in food, some with nothing but silence, but that was enough. Coins bought flour, flour made biscuits. A biscuit broke in half meant 2 days with fewer pangs of hunger. By the third week people stopped looking through. The woman at the bakery, left day-old loaves near the edge of the window. The man at the feed store let her take scraps of cloths from shipping crates. A child gave her a thimble carved from wood, saying only, "Mama said you were good at sewing." It was not friendship, not kindness, exactly, but it was a slow, human. At night, she'd return to the mill. Eli would tumble into her lap, warm and soft from sleep, and she'd hold him while he chatted about the birds, the creek, a lizard he'd nearly caught. She'd hum to him, strokes of her fingers through his hair like music she didn't know the words to. One evening she stitched her own name into the inside hem of her shawl, a quiet declaration, proof she existed, that she was still here. Outside, spring crept closer, the snow retreating, the earth turning softer beneath her feet. No one welcomed her, but no one turned her out either. Sometimes that was how survival began. It was at the general store that she first noticed him. Clara had come to barter 2 mended shirts for a small sack of flour and a spool of thread. Eli trailed behind her, thumb in mouth, dragging a stick in the dust outside. She stepped through the doorway into the scent of sawdust, coffee, and tobacco, a quiet kind of warmth the mill never held. The man behind the counter looked up, broad shoulders, sunburned neck, sleeves rolled to the elbows. He wasn't the owner that was old Mr. Grady, always grumbling about pricing and stock. No, this man was younger, maybe 30, hands that looked like they belonged more to a ranch than a storefront. Their eyes met. He didn't look away, not in judgment, not in curiosity, even. Just present. Still, as if seeing her wasn't a decision he had to make, Clara held up the shirts. "I stitched them myself. Strong seams yours, if the flour and thread are fair trade." He glanced at the shirts, then back at her. "Grady's out back. I don't set prices." Her heart sank slightly, though she kept her face composed. "I understand." He reached for the shirts anyway, thumb running along the stitching. "These are clean, better than what most wear around here." Clara nodded. "That's the hope." Silence passed between them, not awkward, not quite comfortable either. Just real. She could hear the ticking of the clock on the back wall, the shuffle of Eli's feet outside. The man folded the shirts neatly and placed them on the counter. "I'll see you get the flour," he said quietly. She blinked. "You don't have to, I know," he said. "I want to." No smile, no offer to carry her things. Just that, a quiet act, no strings. He slipped the flour and thread into a brown paper bundle and set it down gently between them. "Name's Matthew," he added. After a beat, Clara hesitated. Then Clara. Another moment passed. Then she stepped outside, bundle under one arm, Eli reaching for her hand. She didn't look back, but she felt that small shift in the air, the kind that meant something had changed. Whether or not the world saw it, Matthew never spoke more than necessary. Clara came to notice that first. Each week she returned to the general store, shirts or aprons folded in a satchel, always clean, always neat. Grady would grunt from the back room, never bothering to rise. But Matthew, he'd meet her at the counter, hands marked with flour, dust or twine, and listen. He never asked about the boy, never asked why she lived at the edge of town or why her cheeks hollowed a little more each passing week. He saw her hands instead, thread-worn fingers, a scratch along her knuckle, saw the repairs she'd made to her shawl, saw her, without asking to. One morning she found a small tin left inside her flour sack, biscuits, not fresh but still soft, tied with twine, no note, just something quietly placed. Her throat ached the moment she saw them. She didn't ask, she simply returned the tin, washed and empty. The next time she came, set it on the counter without a word. Their silences grew companionable. Sometimes Matthew would mention things in passing, like how spring calves had come early, or how the North Trail was finally passable again. Nothing of importance, but it was the way he spoke, like she was meant to hear it, like he was offering something without making her owe him for it. Clara didn't know how to respond at first, so she listened, nodded, let the sound of his voice settle around her like a blanket too rarely offered. One day she brought in a patched satchel for him, mended straps, a new lining. He glanced at it, then at her. "You didn't have to." "I know," she said. He looked at her for a long moment before taking it gently, like it held something fragile. "Thank you, Clara." It was the way he said her name that stayed with her. No pity, no curiosity, just quiet respect, like she was someone worth knowing. As she left that day, Eli tugged at her skirts. "Is he nice, Mama?" Clara paused. She hadn't noticed him watching so closely. "Yes," she said at last. "He's kind." And for the first time since arriving in Calico Ridge, she realized she'd spoken of someone without dread or defense. She'd spoken of a man with peace. The tart wasn't much. Clara had scraped together the last of the flour, traded 2 buttons and a clean length of thread for a handful of late spring berries, and used a dollop of lard saved from the preacher's widow to bind the crust. It baked uneven in the mill's old iron stove, browning at the edges, soft at the center, but still it was something sweet, something made with intention. She wrapped it in linen, tied with a strip of blue cotton from Eli's outgrown shirt. Her hands trembled as she carried it through the center of town, past wagons and the smell of horse sweat and sawdust, past a post office and the smithy, past two women who whispered and turned their eyes away. She didn't falter. Matthew was unloading sacks of feed when she stepped into the store's shade. The light caught his profile, dust streaked across his sleeve, hair mussed from his hat. He looked up, wiping his palms on his trousers. "Clara," she held out the bundle. "It's for you." He hesitated, not with confusion, but a kind of pause that felt reverent, as though he understood what it meant for a woman like her to offer anything not asked for. "What is it?" he asked gently. "A tart," she said. "It's rough, but I thought," her voice softened, "you've been kind." Matthew took it with both hands, didn't unwrap it, just looked at her steadily, quietly, and nodded. "Thank you." It was only 2 words, but they carried weight. Not the kind that demanded repayment, the kind that honored the giving. She left without waiting for more. That night, beneath the low hum of crickets and the slow crackle of firewood, Clara watched Eli sleep with his cheek pressed against her thigh. She held the empty linen square in her lap. Matthew had returned it. Clean, folded, placed just inside her sewing kit when she wasn't looking. No note, no reply, just presence. And somehow, that meant more. In the days that followed, he said her name more often. "Clara, that trail's washed out, go around a long way. Clara, we've got extra sacks if you need cloth." Clara simply when she entered. He never asked about her past, never asked whose child Eli was or what drove her into the cold. He only saw her new in flour dust, in soft cloth, in stitched seams, and she found herself watching the door as she walked away. Not in hope, in quiet gratitude. The spring fair came late that year. A stretch of warm days had coaxed the earth. A wake green touched the hillsides and the scent of lilac rode on every breeze. By mid-morning, Calico Ridge gathered in the town square, rough tables set with pies and pickles, quilts draped over fence rails, children chasing each other barefoot through the grass. Clara stood at the edge with Eli's hand in hers, unsure why she'd come. Maybe to show him the music, maybe to prove something to herself that she still belonged to a world where color bloomed, where voices laughed, where sunlight touched faces without scorn. She wore her one blue dress, mended with care, hair tied back with the last clean ribbon. Eli had a vest too big for him and a grin too wide. Still, as she stepped toward the crowd, heads turned. "That's the woman from the mill. Is that her boy? Looks like she's raising him alone. Strange, after all this time." The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. Clara felt them like pricks to the skins, more sharp, familiar. She kept walking. Eli tugged her toward the pie table, where the preacher's wife offered her a tight-lipped nod and passed the boy a sliver of apple tart. Clara thanked her and stepped back, pretending not to notice the way others glanced, then looked away. And then Matthew, he appeared without announcement, just stepped up beside her with his hands in his pockets and his hat pushed back slightly, like he'd been there all along. His eyes scanned the square, not hurried, not unsure. "Eli," he said, nodding at the boy. "You like that pie?" Eli lit up. "Yes, sir." Matthew offered a soft smile, then looked to Clara. "There's a spot under the cottonwoods. Bit of shade. Come sit." She hesitated. People were watching. The blacksmith, the banker's wife, the storekeeper's daughter, watching him speak to her like she wasn't ruined, like she was simply a woman, a mother, a neighbor. But Matthew didn't lower his voice, didn't shift his stance. He just waited. Clara nodded. They walked side by side across the square, Eli skipping between them. She didn't know what people whispered behind her. She didn't look because beside her Matthew stood tall, steady, unashamed. And in that moment she didn't need the town's approval, only the quiet strength of the man who saw her, not as a burden or a mystery but as someone worthy of being beside. The fire crackled low, scenting the mill with pine and smoke. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees, brushing leaves against wood like a soft hand against the skin. Eli slept near the hearth, curled in his quilt, one arm wrapped around a worn stuffed rabbit Clara had stitched from old linen. His breathing was steady, innocent, unbothered by the weight the world placed on grown shoulders. Clara sat in the doorway, shawl wrapped around her, legs pulled up beneath her skirt. She stared out into the dark where moonlight touched the field's edge and stars hung, still and low. She heard his boots before she saw him. Matthew didn't speak as he approached, just stepped into the doorway and leaned against the frame, one hand resting lightly on the wood, the other holding his hat. "I didn't mean to wake you," he said quietly. "You didn't." Her voice was soft, steady. "I don't sleep much." He nodded, eyes following hers to the field beyond. Silence fell between them again, not awkward but charged, full of things not said. "I used to think," he said after a while, "that some people came into the world with too much pain tied to their name, like it followed them, no matter how far they ran." Clara didn't answer. She watched the stars. "But I've been wrong before," he added. She turned to him slowly, the firelight catching the edge of his cheek, his eyes earnest, weathered, open. "You don't ask about where I came from," she said. "I figured if you wanted to tell me you would." She looked down at her hands. "My sister died of fever. Her boy, Eli, he doesn't know how to grieve. He just holds on to what's left. And she paused, voice catching. "I wasn't married." Folks back home didn't look kindly on that. Matthew didn't flinch, didn't look away. Doesn't change what I see. She studied him, searching. And what is it you see? His gaze didn't falter. A woman who's endured, who never asks for pity, who stitches a world back together with her hands when no one else bothers to help. Her throat tightened. I don't have much, he said, but what I have, I'd give freely. The night seemed to hold its breath, and then, slowly, Clara reached for his hand, rough, warm, real. Their fingers laced without a word. No kiss. Just the shared knowing. And in that stillness, something larger than longing settled between them. Trust. The garden began as 3 rows. Clara knelt in the dirt behind Matthew's cabin, dug, rich soil, under her fingernails, sun warming her shoulders through her worn shawl. Beside her, Eli planted marigolds with such careful concentration you'd think the earth would whisper back. Matthew had cleared the ground himself, cut the fence posts, dug the rows. He'd offered her the cabin without asking for anything in return, only saying, "It's quieter here. Might suit you better." And it did. The mill was behind her now, abandoned to the wind and the dust it had always held. The cabin stood with a solid roof, a soft bed, and windows that opened wide to the fields. Not a palace, just a place made for staying. Inside, she kept her sewing kit by the hearth, her thimble, her scissors. In the mornings, she baked cornbread and brewed coffee. At dusk, she folded Eli into his blankets with stories about stars and stitched foxes. At night, she and Matthew would sit side by side on the steps, no words needed. It wasn't a life built on grand things. It was a life built on shared silences and a steady rhythm. One evening, Matthew brought her a cedar box he'd carved himself. Inside, a set of new needles, a pair of gloves, and a ring, simple, silver, no stone, just honest metal, smoothed by his hands. He didn't kneel, didn't ask. He simply held it out, gaze unwavering. Clara looked at it for a long time, then at him. "I don't need promises," she said. "I'm not offering one," he replied. "I'm offering home, however you want to name it." She took the ring and slipped it on her finger. Heart quiet and full. He pulled her close, not to claim her but to share breath. She rested her head against his chest, where the beat of something solid thudded slow and sure. The next morning, they fixed the fence together, really carrying nails in a tin bucket. Matthew steadying the posts, Clara tying cloth around the gate, latch to keep it from creaking in the wind. It wasn't a new beginning because life had wiped the slate clean. It was a new beginning because they'd decided to build forward, rooted in what remained. Shall we move into the final chapter? Section 10. Closing with dignity and peace. You said: next ChatGPT said, "Certainly. Here is the final chapter." Section 10. Closing with dignity and peace. Title. He asked the cowboy to bury his sister. What the rancher did changed to lives forever. Word count, approximately 450. Summer came soft that year. Golden light filtered through the cottonwoods, catching on the wind like lace. The hills beyond the fence shimmered green, and the breeze carried the scent of lilac and warm earth. Calico Ridge had quieted, some less whisper, more nod. A woman alone didn't cause as much talk once she stopped needing to explain herself. Clara stood at the edge of the garden, palms dusted with flour from morning biscuits, watching Eli chase butterflies with a ribbon tied to a stick. He laughed freely, now, without the hollowness that used to live behind his smile. His shoes were patched, his clothes simple, but he was whole in a way she hadn't dared to hope for. Behind her, the door creaked open. Matthew stepped out, sleeves rolled, hair tousled from work. He didn't say anything, just slipped a hand around her waist and rested his chin on her shoulder. She leaned into him, letting her breath match the slow rise and fall of his. There had been no church bells, no lace veil, just a gathering one Sunday, neighbors, a preacher, a pie passed around. Clara wore a shawl she'd stitched herself, blue and white, with thread gifted by the preacher's wife. Eli handed them a bouquet of wildflowers and stood between them, proud as any boy could be. No one spoke against it because by then they all knew Matthew had never rescued her. She had never needed saving. What they'd built wasn't charity, it was choice. Evenings now passed in small rituals, her needle pulling thread, his boots stacked by the door, the sound of Eli breathing easy in the next room. Matthew read aloud, sometimes old books he found in trade while Clara mended, her fingers never stopping, and in the quiet after, when the night settled in deep and wide, he would turn to her with eyes that saw not her scars but her strength. "You reminded me who I already was," she told him once, voice low, as the fire burned to embers. He kissed her hand, where the silver ring shone soft in the lamplight. "And you reminded me I still had something worth giving." Outside, the fence stood firm, the garden rose full, the world still hard but no longer cold. They had no need to speak of forever, because what they had here and now was true, and in the West, that was enough.